Awesome. Hello, everyone. So amazing to be here, and shout out to the organizers because putting these things on, especially coordinating people all over the world, always needs a tremendous amount of effort. So big round of applause. I can hear you all virtually clapping. And thank you all for joining my session on Stranger Danger, finding the Vulns before they find you. Now, I have 3 demos. I like to live dangerously. So I have 3 demos planned for this session, including one of the most scariest demos I think I've ever seen. But anyway, we'll get to that. Stay to the end. Well, it's near the end. Anyway, spoilers. Before we get underway, because this is a global conference, I'd like to, something we do, I'm based in Australia. You could probably tell from my accent, but I'm based in Australia. I'll get to that. But something we like to do in Australia is acknowledge our Indigenous peoples or our First Peoples on the lands that we're presenting on. And to that end, I'd like to pay special heartfelt respect and acknowledgement to the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners where I'm presenting from today in country New South Wales, in a small country town called Narromine. It's about 3,000 people here, just to give you an idea of the size. Anyway, again, thank you all for joining. Now, I do have a disclaimer before we do get too far on the way. That disclaimer is I like tech jokes. So, and in particular, just to make people smile because, well, in the current time, and I hope everyone is all safe and well, in the current times, it's just important that we take the moment to smile. Now, this is an open source joke, so please share it with everyone because that's what open source is about. Anyway, why did the vulnerability get tired? Because it ran somewhere. Oh, I didn't say there were good tech jokes. I do have a whole bunch more though, so maybe at the end, if you really want, I can give you some more. Also, and just reiterating the intro to start to, please, if you have any questions along the way, any facepalm emojis, whatever you want to put in the comments, please do so, and we'll have a chat at the end, or you can just save them to the end, and yeah, we can have a geek out, which is essentially what this is. And I mean, as technology people, that's the one thing I like is it's always just geeking out with friends, which is totally true. Anyway, hello, my name is DeveloperSteve. Actually, legally, there's a bit of a story behind that. So I got married a few years ago. That's my wedding photo on the top right. Actually, I 3D printed the top of that cake the night before my wedding because what can go wrong the night before? It even had its own SMS number. So the guests could actually message in and change the color of the cake because, well, I like doing demos the night before my wedding. Anyway, I've been a evangelist for a number of years now. And so for companies like PayPal Braintree, for Xero, which is an accounting company, Telstra, which is the Australian telecommunications company, or one of the bigger telecommunications company, and recently left IBM to join Snyk as a senior developer advocate. So I got married a few years ago, and I've been doing so many of these events around the world. I did my 100th talk in 2016 to give you an idea. I stopped counting at 100 because, well, it's a lot of geek outs. Anyway, people just started calling me Developer Steve. So when I got married, we combined our last names. So Cooper plus Houchin became Coochin. And when I changed to my married name, like legally changed my married name, I thought, you know what? I'm going to make Developer Steve my middle name. So there we go. That's the story. I told you it was a bit involved. I always like telling it. Anyway, I've been writing code for a lot of years now. Like literally, I started writing, started teaching myself, started writing code, started building fun little applications at the age of 8. So for those that remember it, and please put it in the comments if you remember this language, I basically started writing code with QBasic on an Atari 800 XL, those really big like floppy disks. Oh, it was a long time ago. And even going through, I've always had a passion for code and building out tech things. And for me, it's always been a way to build out like fun experiences for people to just play with, even if I'm the only people that play with it. Like my wedding cake, just building out fun things that change someone's life or just makes them smile or just something useful. And as developers, as technology people, this is one of the things I love the most is just building something that affects someone in just even the smallest way. And even going through what I call my developer origin story, I spent time in digital agencies, building out campaign sites and all sorts of fun little things, and even building out my own startups, even just building out an idea that I had of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this thing existed? For me as a developer, an emerging developer in my developer origin story, that's always just been a way to not only test my skills, but well, try out ideas and just build something fun for people. I always love this meme because it's so true about digital agency. And for those that are doing it, you'll know what I mean. And again, like as developers or as technology people, this is the thing I love the most is I can build out an application or build out a fun little toy or a fun little idea that just changes someone's lives in so many ways. If you think all those times that you open an app on your phone and order food or be entertained or connect with people, which is really important in current times, those little experiences are basically building something out that just like changes someone's day in so many different ways. One of the things I've always been mindful of through my developer origin history is what else is being deployed with that thing that I'm, just npm installing or composer installing. What else is being installed with that? And indeed, like going back through my developer origin story, even to digital agency days, there's been times where I've deployed like single campaign websites that, well, I have to go back and clean up a few weeks later because all of a sudden there's all these pop-ups appearing on the site, or you get that really big bill at the end of the month for all those cloud resources you're using, and it shouldn't be. So many times. And if you think about it, like as developers now, or as technology people, we don't often think about the things that are being installed in that application that you're deploying. If you think of an iceberg, like literally your code sits at the very top above the water of the iceberg analogy, and all that code is being built on all this work in the open source world. And I'm a big fan of open source. I'm a product of open source to some extent. But quite often, like we're deploying these applications using things like open source or openly shared code with little understanding of what's being deployed along with it. And special mention here, and like I've been here so many times, it's the early hours of the morning, usually about 2 a.m., and you have that problem in your code, like something's not working right, or there's that bug that you're trying to fix. And you find that solution that may fix that floating around on Stack Overflow, possibly Reddit, wherever it is, but you don't often know what that thing is that you're adding to your stack, what you're adding to your code, what it's actually going to surface along with it. And again, thinking back to the iceberg stack, like your code at the very top of the stack is being built on open source technologies and potentially opening up doors to the outside world that you may not necessarily know what it's doing. Of course, one of the things I love the most, particularly about being an open source enthusiast, is the exponential growth we see in ecosystems year on year. Do you think like sometimes even in the open source community world, you'll see base functionality from one particular library get split off into a dependency that not only then gets used for that original library, but holistically gets used across the entire ecosystem, which is great because, well, why reinvent the wheel, right? When you can just reuse the dependency across a multiple of libraries. And again, like I love this about the open source world, and in particularly just a lot of the communities, how they come together and not only share knowledge, but they all learn together, and well, everyone kind of wins, including my end users. But what we're seeing now is a surfacing in vulnerabilities in a lot of these ecosystems through new attack vectors that again open up those doorways into your holistic iceberg stack. And we're seeing quite a growth across the entire ecosystem as a whole. Something that's now becoming more prominent across a lot of not only the ecosystems, but also in governments is, of course, open source supply chain security. So that is supply chains that are being affected through vulnerabilities that are being surfaced in supply chain. So if you think like all the adoption of a lot of open source tech and a lot of infrastructure, how that's being affected by these vulnerabilities that are being surfaced. Indeed, like we see a lot of this in the media now, particularly where food supply chains are being disrupted, like utilities are being disrupted in so many different ways. So governments are now looking at ways that they can protect supply chains and keep them nice and safe. An example of that we're seeing, and this isn't only in Australia, one of my favorites, I love IoT stuff, got so much of it, 3D printers, you name it. But yeah, in IoT security, for example, we're now seeing governments look at ways they can mandate the ETSI security standards across all consumer and commercial devices. Again, this is about protecting those supply chains to make sure, well, there's no break in them, because we like getting stuff sometimes from like supermarkets and things. But yeah, making sure that there's some guidelines in place to protect the firmware being deployed and rules around how that firmware can be handled. And this is something that not only the Australian government is looking at, but the UK government, for example, has already adopted the top 3 recommendations from this particular standard. So it varies how we see these vulnerabilities being surfaced. And we're going to look at 2 demos in a moment. Actually, I have the first 2 demos coming up. Oh, they're all going to work first time. I know they are. But the way that these vulnerabilities are being surfaced across holistic ecosystems varies depending on the ecosystem. So as you can see on this slide here, like in the PHP, one of my favorites in the PHP ecosystem, I mean, they're all my favorites really, but in the PHP ecosystem, with Composer for package list, for example, it's through direct dependencies rather than indirect dependencies that we see in NPM. 80% of the vulnerabilities discovered in NPM, for example, in the NPM ecosystem, through indirect dependencies. And we're going to be looking at one of those in the demos coming up. But essentially, that's where I NPM install a particular package as a developer, and that in turn pulls in some support packages with it, which is where the vulnerabilities are being surfaced. Now, special mention here, and I may have mentioned it a few times already, but I am an open source enthusiast. So I always like to point out here is please contribute back where you can. I know you already may be doing it, in which case, ooh, amazing, thank you. But always remember to contribute back where you can. Quite often what we see, particularly with these vulnerabilities being surfaced, is there's a delay between the security vulnerability being surfaced inside or being identified in a particular community group or back on a repository as a bug report. And then that takes time for the community to be able to not only identify that particular bug and validate it or vulnerability, but then also to mitigate a fix and put out a release candidate and get tested, etc. There is that delay which can cause things from being patched and things from being mitigated as quick as they can. So always remember to please contribute back, even if you're just updating READMEs. These communities do amazing work, and it's basically, I mean, a lot of the times volunteer-led work. So I'll stop talking about that now, because I know you're all going to if you're not already. One of the ways we do that at Snyk is through a program called Snyk Advisor that basically gives a nice health check overview on a particular library or a particular community's activities. And this is useful for a few things, because as developers, we're able to use this to basically do some due diligence on some of the packages using inside a particular app that you're building out. And also shout out to the security researchers that contribute to the Node.js ecosystem vulnerability disclosure program, which we help manage as well. And this is great because, again, we're keeping our end users safe, we're keeping our infrastructure safe, and well, that's really important. So if you're not contributing back to it and you want to, please reach out or check out the blog post that we've got on that, on how you can get involved as well. Anyway, let's hack some apps, because yeah, it's going to be fun. Anyway, there's some chat already, which is great. I won't open it now, but anyway, I'm tempted because I always love seeing what people are saying. Anyway, all right, so this first app is basically, this is a demo app we have on the Snyk GitHub. And these are really handy because as developers or as technology people, we're able to, well, as a developer at the code level, if I can understand the vulnerability, I'm able to, well, understand it fundamentally at the most granular level, and then know how to mitigate, not only mitigate that, but also identify future threats. So this, and I always love pointing this out, is yes, there is 61 known vulnerabilities in this particular demo, totally intentionally. One thing I always like to point out, and I know you're probably not going to, is don't take this app to production. This is for testing purposes only. In the exploits folder in this repo too, we have a whole bunch of different vulnerabilities that you can play with, including the instructions on how to do it. The one we're looking at today is using a library known as the marked library, which is a markdown. We use it as an import library as for this particular demo. We'll get to that in a second. But there's a full write-up on this in our vulnerability database as well. So we're using, where is it? We're using 0.3.5 and anything above 0.3.1 and below 0.3.6 is bad and you shouldn't use it because it's got a cross-site scripting attack, as you can see here. But I like to live dangerously, so we're using 0.3.5. Now this is a cross-site scripting attack, so essentially what's going to happen is, well, you're gonna have to find out. Anyway, this is a markdown library. So essentially what happens is in this to-do app demo, basically as a user, when I input data, the marked library, which has a sanitize function, as you can see there, is basically able to identify particular character combinations that we don't want to see inside our application. And this is where an attacker is able to use a particular surface vulnerability in the library and be able to get around that, which is what we're about to do. So like I said, this is a markdown library. I can essentially do markdown and it will basically, in this instance, appear back on the user interface this inside this browser. So this is a, oops, bold statement. And yes, that is a, well, that's actually a partially bold statement, but you get the idea. So one thing we can do too with Markdown, of course, is we can do links. So something similar to that, standard Markdown link. And that works as expected because, well, if I hover over it, that's going to take me to the website that I anticipated it would. So one of the commonly used attack vectors is to be able to inject JavaScript inside user inputs, which is why sanitizing user inputs is, well, pretty important. So if I put in that, for example, which was some basic JavaScript inside the Markdown link, you can see that didn't work because, well, the sanitize function is working, running some regex and running some character matching to be able to determine that that's potentially something we don't want to see inside our input. One of the ways to get around that, though, is to do the same thing again, but URL encode some of the characters, again, to try and trip up that sanitize function so that, well, we can do some malicious things as a malicious attacker. So that actually won't work either because the sanitize function is able to filter that out. So the way to get around this particular one and where this particular vulnerability surfaces is by adding in this or as which comes in as a JavaScript object type. So again, we're trying to get around that sanitize function as a malicious actor and be able to do some nasty things either inside the stack or inside the user's browser. And that one, well, I already knew that was going to work, but as you can see there, if I click that now, it comes up with an alert box which says this alert box is alerting, and yes, it is. There's a number of ways of, like, this was relatively harmless, but there's a number of ways a malicious attacker would be able to use that to do all sorts of nasty things, particularly with something being surfaced inside the user's browser. You can steal session data, like you can redirect the user, all sorts of different sort of nasty options appear. Anyway, let's have a look at another one. This time in Java. Again, we have this available on the Snyk GitHub, and it's literally just for playing with to understand at the developer or at the granular level how these vulnerabilities work. So this is, again, the same type of similar type app. Actually, I'm going to wake up my Heroku quickly because it's usually gone to sleep. And spoilers, I'm running this on Heroku, as you may have just guessed. Again, we have an exploits folder, which has all sorts of known all the vulnerabilities that you can play with in this particular demo. The one we're looking at now is a file traversal vulnerability. So, and it's using the zip slip utility library. And there's a full write-up on how that works and a number of different languages that this one also appears in. So let's sign in with our with our super secure, and Chrome always tells me, hey, there it is, that it's not a good password, but it's a demo password, so this is fine. So similar to before, we've got a basic to-do list, and as a user, I can create I'm going to use testing too. I can use I can input a basic to-do list item like so, and it comes up with testing too. So one thing we can do with this app is also upload files. So, which is what we're going to do to basically demo the vulnerability for this particular vulnerability type. Oh, it's blocking that. There we go. How we're going to do that is by uploading a zip file that's going to do the file traversal on our Heroku instance. So I can show you what's inside that zip, which is there's two files. There's a good.txt text file, and then this massive file traversal back on the server infrastructure. And essentially what we're doing with this particular attack is traversing backwards through the file directory on the server, and then replacing inside the JDK, we're replacing the native to ASCII function. Inside the code, on the code side of things, essentially, like I said, we're using the zip util library, and we're basically going to replace that input that I did with the to-do item entry. We're going to replace the native to ASCII function as part of that attack. So let's upload our file. So we're going to zip/zip. Oh, that is such a tongue twister. And click upload. There we go there. So as you can see in my files now, I have a good.txt file as we expected there would. And as an unsuspecting user, if I now try and create testing again, if I now try and create another to-do list item, essentially that's now hacked. Dun, dun, dun. So yeah, as you can see, it's now got wahaha, gotcha. And from here on in, like that's only ever going to do that. And there's a number of ways that a malicious attacker would be able to use that particular function, including, well, hijacking the server. And, well, you could pretty much do just about anything you want, even mine crypto if you wanted to at that point. Anyway, let's go back to the Prozo, and then I've got probably the scariest demo I ever do, which I hope works. It should work. Those worked. No, I knew those would. There was no doubt. And again, as developers, like we build these applications to try and change people's, well, bring something to our end users in so many different ways. So it's important that we not only do the due diligence to understand what we're deploying and what our users are putting their trust in us in that we're deploying in so many different ways, but also, well, we need to protect their data, we need to protect our infrastructure. And it doesn't take long to be able to fundamentally understand what you're deploying and, well, what you're building out. Of course, one of the things I love, well, we've seen an emergence of this in the last 5-10 years, but the emergence of cloud native has just meant so much for bringing elasticity and speed to the apps we deploy. If you take Docker and containerization, or if you take Docker, for instance, we've had over 242 billion downloads from Docker Hub to date, which is phenomenal when you think about it. And as a developer, I love this the most because I can build my apps in a containerized local environment and then deploy them across clouds and bring elasticity to the deployments that I do, which is really, really cool. But it probably comes as no surprise that we're also seeing a rise in the number of vulnerabilities being identified in base container images. So if you take the top 10 Docker base images to date, a lot of them are carrying known security vulnerabilities in them because they're built from the same open source components that we've just been talking about. And again, this is about building out infrastructure and building out applications that keep our end users safe. The way I like to think about this is with great containerization comes great responsibility. It's so true. It's about protecting our end users and making sure that the trust that they put in us for protecting their data and their experience, that we keep that trust and, well, keep them safe. The last part of our holistic iceberg view is infrastructure as code, which as a dev, as a DevOps, as a previous CTO, I always loved this because It means, again, I can build and deploy applications out with speed and elasticity. And well, from the developer and DevOps side of things, I can also define how those applications are being deployed, and from configuring user types or memory usage or storage or whatever it's going to be. I can basically define that inside a configuration file really easily, really quickly. But again, this is where like making sure that we keep our users safe by also making sure the configurations we're deploying are well scanned, and basically, well, keep our infrastructure as safe as well, because that is one of those configuration files are also one of the #1 cloud vulnerability misconfigurations identified by agencies like the NSA year on year. But we missed something really important in our holistic iceberg stack. We totally did. Actually, we missed the most important thing, the development environment. Now, this one really scares me a lot because I like my development environment. It's a fun place where I can build really fun things. But yeah, we're now seeing an emergence of vulnerabilities appearing in local development environments. Yes, I am talking about localhost. Again, this is the place that I build all my things. In April, we actually saw Homebrew, which is also one of my favorite things. We saw Homebrew come out with a security incident disclosure where they were basically seeing some vulnerabilities appear in Homebrew configuration and indeed some of the components that were being deployed. One of the things, probably one of the most scary things on top of all that, I mean, it's all kind of scary, particularly like my local host, but Visual Studio Code, which currently has 14 million monthly active users and 25,000 extensions in its ecosystem, is now something we're seeing these vulnerabilities also surface in. So a few months ago, Snyk actually released some security research into 4 extensions that we discovered some pretty big vulnerabilities in. In fact, I'm about to demo one of these. It is totally going to work. Oh, it will work. But Latex Workshop, Open in Default Browser, Instant Markdown, which is the one we're going to be looking at in this session. And I swear this last one's real. I just have never used it or heard of it. But Rainbow Fart. Yes, that is an extension. These vulnerabilities expose the local development environment to a remote attacker to be able to basically get in and do all sorts of nasty stuff. In fact, the one that we're looking at tonight, wait, I'm not going to spoil it. You'll see what it does. You'll see what it does. Anyway, on that note, should we give it a spin? Yeah, I reckon we should. All right, so let's go. This one's a little bit more involved than the other one. Now, I have this on my GitHub, so you can try it yourself. The only thing I will ask is please do not leave this particular extension installed. It's important to note that, and I've got full write-ups on how this particular one works, and including all the links to the security research and the blogs that we released around this one. So it's important to note that we're using 1.4.6, which is the current previous version, not the one that's currently in production. So please do not leave that particular version installed. Essentially, I'm going to tell you. Essentially, the first time this was demoed, we did it on a Snyk Live YouTube session, and my manager Liren basically demoed how this worked with the security researcher that had originally identified this one, and they exposed his password file for his Mac on the live stream. So he had to change all these passwords. So please don't leave this one installed if you want to try it yourself. And I'm going to show you how it works. So there's 2 parts to this. This is the attacker screen. So I'm kind of I'm not actually attacking my own development environment. I don't trust this one so much that I don't leave this extension installed in my own VS Code. I actually run OS X inside a VM, and I run everything inside that because I don't want my password file exposed. Anyway, this particular attack essentially, there's 2 files. Now I'm using PHP for this. You can use just about any language you want because it would work in any language. So what we're basically going to do is leverage an open port on that particular extension. So the instant markdown extension basically allows a developer to be able to live edit a README file, and you'll be able to see the output instantly inside a browser. So we leverage an open port to basically traverse the developer's local system and essentially try and grab a file. So you can define whatever file you want. We're actually going to be looking for a file called passwords, which is a little bit like a capture the flag. I've just I'll show you when we get to the developer computer, but essentially I've got in the home directory, I've got a file called passwords. Where we're basically going to grab it and post it back to a second file running here, which essentially just grabs post data and saves it to a text file. Pretty simple. And that's just going to appear. I can't make this box any bigger, but essentially that's just going to appear in the root directory where these two files are running. To do it, we're basically going to be running PHP localhost, which I've just started. And I'm going to move that down a bit. And we're going to be running ngrok to tunnel that out to the internet. All right. Oh, why? Okay. Oh no, my ngrok. I think my colleague is running ngrok. Oh, I jinxed it when. Oh, my colleague is running ngrok. I can't message her. Well, she's using. Hang on, I need to message. See, I should get a second ngrok running. Well, that kind of hopefully she answers me back. All right, so while that's running, while we're waiting for a response back, I'll show you the attacking the developer side of things. So like I said, I'm running OS X inside a VM. And essentially what the plugin does is, like I said, runs a live edit markdown. So you can see there, I've got instant markdown, the output from an instant markdown file appearing inside a Chrome browser. And if I do testing like that, it will automatically appear in just like that inside a Chrome browser. She's not responding, so I may not be able to demo this one. We'll see how we go in a moment. And essentially on the developer computer, I've got in the home directory, like I said, I've got a passwords file. So if I do cat passwords, inside that file, I've literally just got can't touch this, which we may not be able to if I can't get my ngrok running. Let me try that again. No, it's definitely not running. Well, that's a dilly of a pickle. I don't have time to change the token too. Thankfully, I can probably do, all right, so here's one that I did earlier. Essentially, what's going to happen is when I can show you what it would look like. Let's just see live demos. What can go wrong? Anyway, what should happen is you can see there, it's basically going to say you've been rickrolled. And the idea behind this is, as a malicious attacker, I would send a link to, or in this case, an ngrok link, which you can put behind like a custom domain, like a CNAME custom domain, which will redirect over to an ngrok link. But essentially, as a malicious attacker, I would use a little bit of social engineering to basically send that to the unaware developer and say, hey, you won't believe what this is, and then they'll click it and essentially trigger the file transfer. What will happen then is a whole bunch of little iframes will open up. I don't know if you can see it inside that particular, inside this Chrome, but a series of iframes open up inside this page and basically search for the target file that we're after from as a remote attacker. Just going to try that actually. I haven't had a response, but yeah, anyway, that was, see, so annoying. I had that running before this. Wait, I'm going to try one last thing to see if maybe it's, I don't think it's that, but I'm pretty sure that's usually, yeah, using the other file. Okay, cool. Anyway, I've got full write-ups in this on my GitHub. So yeah, Again, check it out if you want, try it yourself, but it's also on the Snyk YouTube as well. But please do not keep that version of the extension installed. The one that I'm using is a old version. So there it is there, Instant Markdown 1.4.6. So once we identified this particular threat, we alerted the maintainer and they updated and fixed it up, which is pretty cool. Anyway, should I do one more thing, seeing as how that one failed? Okay, let me show you, seeing as how we've got a bit of time. So back to those first two demos I did, I can show you what the vulnerabilities that get identified in those particular ones, for example. I was hoping it should respond in the meantime, but no, this is fine. This is fine. I should switch to my this is fine thing. Oh, and that one's not loading either. Okay, cool. Well, we're doing good, aren't we? This session. You know what? I'm just going to switch back to the Prezo and we can do some questions. Anyway, again, there's full write-ups on this particular disclosure or this particular series of disclosures. So please check that out and just be really careful, particularly about what you're installing now in development environments. One of the things I always like saying or pointing out and even doing is, particularly with the likes of Homebrew, where sometimes I'm installing a particular library or a particular component, which, I mean, it seems cool at the time, but I may not be using long term. So always remember to clean out things that you aren't using, and even using containerization, containers like in Docker and Kubernetes, for example. Always remember to start with the most possible image and only add the components in that you need. Same with your development environments as well, is like clean them out, make sure you haven't got any old components in there, any old libraries or open source things. So always remember to be scanning source code, containers, infrastructure. And again, I can't stress this one enough. Please be aware of what is in your local development environments, because you don't want someone picking up your passwords files, even if they can't get their ngrok running. Just some final things too. We've got SnyckCon 2021 coming up in October, so it's free to attend. There's some amazing speakers from a wide industry in there, from the likes of Twitter. I think there's someone from Google. There's a Troy Hunt from Have I Been Pawned as well, be doing some amazing talks. So check that out. Also, if you know somebody in the DevSecOps in the community, or someone that's just doing some amazing things in the space, the DevSecOps Leadership Awards are open now. So please take the time to nominate them and recognize the amazing work that they're doing as well. Also, we do have DevSecOn meetups and chapters throughout, well, almost through everywhere. So we're about to launch one in Australia. There's one just launched in India. There's already one in Singapore as well. And more are being opened all the time. So please check those out. One of the things I love most, particularly about these community run groups, is just everyone shares knowledge, everyone learns together. So if you're interested in starting one, or just interested in getting involved, please reach out. There's an amazing Slack community as well if you want to talk to some amazing DevSecOps folks. And just lastly, please remember to always use your tech superpowers for good, and remember to be excellent to each other. Thank you very much. Just going to try that ngrok one more time, because maybe now it's clear. Oh, no. Anyway. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to chat.